All right, guys. So the title of today's video is what I learned from the knitting class organizer expanded. So I already made a shorter version of this video. If you want to go ahead and take a look at that on my YouTube channel, which is Butterfly Spirit 314, you're more than welcome to watch that brief video. I think it's like a minute and 17 seconds. You can, go through that one easy. I want to make an expanded version because I feel that I want to add a little bit more of my experience, okay? Number one, it's hard to learn to knit from YouTube because you don't have someone one-on-one teaching you how to knit. Okay, let me add in my experience, okay? So, what I started off doing, I'm still a beginner knitter, okay? And how I started off with knitting is I started off basically by watching YouTube videos on knitting, beginner knitting videos on YouTube. And I felt that because I was able to watch the videos and take notes, and the videos seemed straightforward for me to follow as far as knitting was concerned, I thought I was going to be able to slowly learn to knit. Okay. And so I took the recommendations from YouTube videos and I went and brought me some knitting needles as well as some yarn. Okay. And then I tried knitting by following along with a video. And it didn't work. So then I went and bought some more knitting needles and some more yarn. And I tried to follow along with another video and that didn't work. Okay. And this is why I make the point that it's hard to learn to knit from YouTube. Not only did the knitting class organizer say this, but I also found it on my own because although YouTube videos, although it can seem simple and like you can follow along and everything with it, there's still some behind the scenes things that the knitters are probably doing. They're probably going to be knitting really fast. You're probably not even going to be able to see how they even do the slip knot or cast on. You're not seeing them do the stitches one by one in some videos. They probably just tell you, okay, do 20 stitches along with your cast on, but there's many different types of cast ons. Okay? And if you don't know what a knit stitch is, it's going to be very frustrating, right? If you don't know what that is. And for some of us, we have learned the method of the easy cast on, that cast on where you use your thumb and you make stitches by wrapping the yarn around your thumb and stuff. That's the easy cast on. However, what I've found is that with that particular type of thumb cast on, you're not going to be able to learn how to do things like knitting and purling, because you can get those stitches onto the knitting needle just fine, like I was able to do years ago. But when it came to me wanting to add another row of stitches, then I became confused when I found information and it said that I needed to learn to knit and purl, and then I saw that the people in the videos were not using the easy cast on with the thumb. They weren't using that. What they were actually doing was they were actually using the knitted cast on. Okay? And either the knitting cast on or the long tail cast on. And they were using those and it looked a lot more complicated. And that's what got me to stop with knitting, because I was like, man, there's a lot of stuff I don't know. Okay. So when it comes to learning to knit from YouTube, YouTube is an excellent resource for learning to knit, as long as you've already have had a class. If you've had a class where you've had one-on-one instruction, and then let's say after the class you're watching YouTube videos, maybe a day or a couple of weeks after your initial knitting class, then you're fine. Then you can go to YouTube for a reference, right? But there's going to be some things on YouTube that they're not going to show you about knitting, and it's just something about getting one-on-one knitting instruction from a beginner knitting class that's a lot easier, because you get to watch your instructor actually show you how to cast on. They teach you about knitting needles. They teach you about doing knitting first, which is a knit stitch first. And then they'll gradually ease you into doing purling. And like me, I got used to doing the knitting stitches first and the knitting cast on. When I left out of class, I had to try to remember it, and I had a hard time remembering it. But then eventually I was able to pick it back up when I got my interest piqued from YouTube videos. Okay, but this was after my class, after I had the foundation. Okay, so one-on-one instruction for beginner knitting is essential. Okay, very much essential, because this is where you can get your questions answered. When you're following along with a YouTube video and you're trying to learn to knit, maybe on the rare chance some people might be able to pick stuff up, but there's some people who probably won't be able to. I'm the type of person, I'm hands-on, so I actually have to be able to follow along and do what it is the person's doing. If that person who's making this video leaves out something, they leave out anything about knitting and stuff like that, then it'll be frustrating and I want to stop, you know. But me getting into a knitting class actually gave me more confidence towards knitting, and it actually made me, you know, it helped me to start to cement the basics of knitting into my head, so that even when I went home, I may have felt like I forgot, but then I was able to easily pick it back up. Okay. Number 2, in-person knitting classes book up fast. The second thing I learned from the knitting organizer, okay, or knitting class organizer, okay. The reason why knitting classes book up so fast is because there are a lot of people who want to learn to knit. All right, right now it is winter time right now, and with it being winter time, it's extremely cold. And when it's winter time, most of us, when we go outside, we wear gloves, mittens, hats, scarves, sweaters, right? We wear the more, you know, knitted fabrics, okay? Knitted garments, right? And since we wear those because they keep us warm, there are a lot of people who feel like, you know, why do I have to go and buy a hat that's knitted when I can just make one, you know? But there's a lot that goes into making a hat, you know, as opposed to just starting off one day watching a YouTube video, okay? There's a lot that goes into that. There's a lot of practice that goes into making a hat, okay? And, you know, with it being chilly and people being bored and them not having anything to do and they can't go outside, people pick up knitting. And some people will pick up knitting and they'll keep going with it. And some people will stop because they find that it's hard. And it could be because they're getting the wrong types of information about knitting. Okay? So, when you have the opportunity in your area to get into a knitting class, don't be surprised if there's a lot of people trying to get into that class, because they want to learn to make things. Some people want to learn to make things because they want to make knitted items for their families and friends. Sometimes they want to make knitted items for their classmates, you know, people in their neighborhood, you know. Sometimes people want to make stuff, you know, to sell as a business. They want to, you know, maybe knit hats or gloves or whatever, you know, open up their own online business or store or whatever and stuff. And they, you know, want to start by doing the hobby, right? That's why people have hobby businesses, right? People have a wider variety of reasons as to why they want to learn to knit. But before somebody can get to, you know, really making the more fashionable knitted items, hats, gloves, scarves, sweaters, sweater dresses, socks, stockings, skirts, boleros, you know, little knitted jackets, I think those, I think it's like the cover over or whatever, you know, it all, it'll take time to get there. So it's not just you'll learn how to knit overnight and then you can make that stuff. Even if you're seeing everywhere that you can learn to knit overnight, it doesn't work like that. It really takes you time to learn to knit. I'm still a beginner, and I've learned to do the knitted cast on and do the knitted stitches, but I'm slowly transitioning into doing purl stitches, which is going to allow me to move my knitted stitches over to the other needle and then make another row of stitches. Because when it comes to making a scarf, you have to have knitted and purled stitches. Now you could have a scarf with all knitted stitches, but knitting and purling stitches, it kind of just makes it look a little bit more even. Okay, and when you have the opportunity in your area to get into a beginner knitting class, go ahead and book the class while you can, because there's other people like you who want to get into that class, and it might be a matter of minutes or days that you have to get into that class. And who knows, maybe if you don't get into that class, you may have to wait a month, 2 months, 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, who knows, maybe even longer to find a class. You know what I mean? It could take time to find another class. You may have scarce opportunities. You may have one class that everybody's kind of going for, and that may, it may have a long waiting list if you don't get into it. Okay? Number 3, not every knitting class is for beginners, because there may be knitting opportunities available to you or me in our areas, but the events, classes, meetings we find that focus on making specific items may be for intermediate to advanced knitters. This means a beginner knitter will not be able to learn the knitting basics here, such as knitting, purling, and how to use knitting needles, yarn, etc. So, to expound upon this, okay, what I want to say here is that there are knitting events that are going to be around in my area or your area, okay? And when we go to these knitting events, as beginners, we think that, we're going to be able to go to these events and attend, and we're going to be taught how to knit, because, the events are talking about how to make stuff. How to make a hat, how to make a scarf, how to make a sweater, okay, how to make a sock. And as beginners, we'll go into it thinking, oh, okay, they're going to teach me the basics and stuff. But then we get there and we find out that they're not teaching the basics to us. We're finding out that these events are for people who already know how to knit. They already have their basic foundation already. They know what they're doing. And then we're let down and we're like, well, why isn't there more events for beginner knitters? And there are opportunities for beginner knitting students, such as myself, and that means you have to attend a beginner knitting class so you can learn the foundation. And even after you establish your foundation in knitting, like I have, you still have to practice knitting, because you want to learn how to do it gradually. You don't want to rush through it and everything like that. You want to let your mind learn to knit. Okay? You can have the foundation laid with knitting, where you learn how to knit, okay? And you learn to knit a cast on, like me, for example. And you might try purling, but then you find out that you have to wait and then go to the next class and learn how to purl, okay? You can, spend a long time learning to knit like I did. I spent about an hour and a half to 2 hours learning the basics. But even though I was learning the basics, there's still more information that I've learned since my class about knitting. And knitting is a journey. It's not a race. It's not something where you have to try to rush through it. You're going to run into problems. You're going to make mistakes. You're definitely going to do that. But give yourself the chance. Eventually, you'll learn how to knit. You'll be able to make a lot of stuff. You'll be able to pick up some knitting books and knitting magazines where you can make some amazing, knitted pieces. And people will be amazed at what you've made. But you have to learn how to do the basic stuff. It's just like, a baby, learning how to crawl and then standing up, and then learning how to actually, hold on to the side of the wall, and then learning how to walk, right? That's how it is with knitting. That's how it is with sewing. That's how it is with crocheting, cooking, any kind of hobby out there. You have to learn the foundation first, and then you have to practice in order to get real good at what you're doing. Don't be afraid to start off doing something and you feel like you're not making progress, because you aren't. You just have to let yourself learn. And when you don't know how to do something, ask for help. Do your research. Find the answer, and you can get help with, with being able to do whatever hobby it is that you're trying to do. All right, guys, thanks for watching. See you in my next video.